All right, deduplication. Is everything making sense to you guys so far? Okay. I figure I'm either doing a good job or I'm putting you to sleep, one or the other. So, all right, deduplication. I consider deduplication to be almost a perfect technology to deploy in a VMware environment. Okay? It is almost the killer app, I guess you could say. It requires no integration whatsoever. We don't need ESX to be aware that we're running deduplication. We don't have to do anything on the ESX side to take advantage of it. Okay? The benefits are immediately obvious when you're using this with NFS. Not quite so obvious when we're doing LUNs, but still valuable nevertheless. Okay? You can't brush aside the fact that it's a free license available at no additional charge, although we do need to account for the minimal performance overhead that may occur as a result of having deduplication. Did anybody have a chance to go to that Deduplication Mythbusters session? I couldn't hit that one. Did they have? I mean, what did they have to say about the deduplication overhead there? Didn't want to go into it. Okay. Well, there you go. I was hoping maybe we'd have some good information to share. Okay, so the question is, why do we say the benefits are more obvious with NFS than LUNs? Well, the key thing here is that when we deduplicate a LUN, the deduplicated blocks are not returned to the host file system. So the host file system, if we say a 250 gig LUN, you're going to store 250 gigs of data in that, and that's that. Now, it might take up only 100 gigs of data on the storage array, but that LUN is always going to be 250 gigs. Whereas with NFS, if I put 200 gigs of data into it and I dedupe it and it comes down to 100 gigs, I see those space savings right off the bat. I don't have to go back and do anything with it. Okay, does that answer your question? All right. So, kind of following on his question there about using deduplication with LUNs, one of the ways in which we can take advantage of the additional space that we get when we use deduplication with LUNs is we can provision additional LUNs to be turned back out to the storage array. As I was saying in response to his question, we might provision a 250 gig LUN and put about 250 gigs of data in it. Okay? But it's only going to take up, let's say, 100 gigs or 125 gigs of space actually on the storage array. With that other amount of data, we can provision an additional LUN and feed it back to the virtualization solution again. What that means, though, is that you now end up with multiple LUNs inside that flexible volume. That presents considerations for snapshots, because if we snapshot one LUN, we have to snapshot all the LUNs. Okay? It presents considerations for replication via snap mirror. If we replicate one LUN, we have to replicate all the LUNs. Okay? Unless we wanted to go in and set up different queue trees for these and do queue tree snap mirror, but something you have to think about. Okay? In addition, we need to make sure that we run our deduplication before we run snapshots. Okay? Otherwise, we run the risk of having blocks locked in the snapshot and our snapshot space running high because it's marked that deduplication as a change. Okay? In addition, okay, we may find in our particular customers that there are business factors or other considerations that are driving VM placement that run counter to how we might place VMs for the purposes of optimizing deduplication. When we look at placing VMs for optimizing deduplication, we're going to be talking about placing, similar VMs together, all our Windows VMs together in one area, all of our Linux VMs together in one area, all Solaris VMs in one area together, something along those lines. Similar types grouped together so that we can get the most benefit out of deduplication. It'll find the most duplicate blocks and remove them to give us the most space back. But there are other considerations that are not necessarily technological considerations that may run counter to that. And disaster recovery is one excellent example. So I was in a session again this morning on VMware SRM, and if you had a chance to attend that session, you know that right now, as it currently stands, when you want to use VMware SRM with NetApp storage, you have to use block-based storage. NFS support is still next year, early next year. March, I think, is the anticipated time frame. So we have to be using Fibre Channel or iSCSI to do VMware SRM, and the unit of failover is the LUN. If I want to fail over a VM, it has to be in a LUN, and if I fail that LUN over, all the VMs in that LUN fail over. So if I wanted to do failover for one VM, I would have to do one VM per LUN. Okay? But if I want to, and most of the times we don't do that, SRM isn't really intended to provide failover for a single VM. It's really intended to provide failover for a wide group of VMs. Okay? But I have to place my VMs in those LUNs according to their replication schedule, according to the replication properties, according to how they're going to fail over, when they're going to fail over, and what order they're going to fail over. And those business drivers may run completely counter to how we would place them for optimizing deduplication. You know, we may have to place LUNs all mixed, VMs all mixed up all over the LUNs, and then run into suboptimal deduplication ratios. But that's just kind of how it is, because we had to meet SLAs or application ownership or political pressures, replication, backup, who knows? Could be anything. But there could be any number of driving factors that are business related that are pushing against placement for deduplication. So looking at clones and deduplication, you know, when should I use one? When should I use the other? First of all, and this really should be the first bullet on this slide, they're not mutually exclusive. You're not forced into using only one or the other. And I'll point that out in a little more detail when we talk about some of the resources. But when does cloning make the most sense? Okay, we know with cloning that there's some additional investment involved. We have to write scripts, or we have to have tools that are going to clone out the files and clone out the volumes and register them if necessary and all that kind of jazz. It really only makes sense to do that when you're going to get a big return on investment when you're provisioning or reprovisioning environments on a regular basis. Okay? If I have 500 VMs, maybe it's a test dev environment, maybe it's VDI, and I need to tear all those down and reprovision all of them very quickly, cloning makes a lot of sense because I can do that kind of provisioning very, very quickly. Okay? I don't need to wait on file copies to occur or anything of that nature. The environments are best suited when they are very homogeneous, because if I'm going to clone a bunch of VMs, whether I use file level flex cloning, whether I use volume level flex cloning, I'm going to end up with a lot of exact copies of each other. Okay? And with the exception of some tools that we'll discuss in a minute, you'll use cloning when it's okay for the storage team to pick up some of these provisioning tasks. Now, there's a workaround. There's a utility available, if you haven't already heard about it, that'll help adjust that. But in the absence of that, we have to understand that the storage team may have to take on more of the provisioning tasks. Deduplication, on the other hand, if provisioning occurs less frequently, if the builds are less homogeneous and more heterogeneous, if the storage team can't or doesn't want to assume those responsibilities, you're probably better suited using deduplication, because at that point we don't need the VI integration. We can just take advantage of the extra space savings, and that'll be that. Okay. Again, not mutually exclusive, so there are cases in which you'll use both, and I'll mention that in just a moment. All right.